Hello and welcome, or welcome back, as the case may be. I'm Brad Villers. If you joined me last time, you'll know that we've thrown back the curtain and identified, at least according to author Larkin Rose, that authority is the most dangerous superstition. That may not sound that threatening and to some may actually have some appeal. But when he takes the next step, one that we'll find is very logical and well-founded, and claims that government is the ultimate and most glaring form of authority, well, I have a feeling a lot of people may take issue with that. Perhaps that includes you. If so, I'd encourage you to stay engaged in this discussion. Embrace that discomfort of cognitive dissonance, the stress of holding contradictory ideas, and give some space for the potential that you might benefit from having your beliefs challenged. And in the process, ask yourself whether those beliefs are in fact yours, or whether they were fed to you or you adopted them. In either case, without ever giving them thought. I can tell you without question that was true for me. It's uncomfortable, but it's also the first step in exiting your matrix. Thanks for taking the time to be here, and on we march into our exploration of the most dangerous superstition. As I mentioned last time, our first task is to define the terms authority, and by extension, government, so that they can, to use our author's words, be defined and examined objectively. In an analogy he uses repeatedly throughout the book, Rose compares and contrasts government with street thugs, bullies, and organized crime, and adds, quote, "The distinguishing feature of authority is that it is thought to have the right to give and enforce commands. In the case of government, its commands are called laws, and disobeying them is called crime." Authority, he says, can be summed up as the right to rule. That unlike preachers or advertisers, the commands of government are backed by the threat of punishment, and that it somehow possesses a moral right to forcibly control others. But here we're presented with the first of many uncomfortable realities about the true nature and source of the claim of that moral right to control. Certainly, the government possesses significant tools with which to enforce its edicts, wielded by law enforcement, military, IRS agents, and the list goes on, with the newest addition being the hordes of contact tracers the overlords threatened to unleash during Operation Roll 'em Up just a few years ago. But its real power derives not from what government can do, but rather how it is viewed. And this from the book. What distinguishes a street gang from government is how they are perceived by the people they control. The trespasses, robbery, extortion, assault, and murder committed by common thugs are perceived by almost everyone as being immoral, unjustified, and criminal. Their victims may comply with their demands, but not out of any feeling of moral obligation to obey, merely out of fear, end quote. Not so for government, which the overwhelming majority, and we're talking damn near everyone, perceives to be owed obedience, that they have a duty to obey, which goes far beyond just the fear of punishment, and even to the point of those who proclaim their exuberance in being a law-abiding taxpayer. Let's take a recent example. Now, we love a billionaire, any billionaire, especially one who gives us our regular fix of that coveted American obsession, sports. Here he is, that shining example of profound disconnect between intelligence and net worth, Mark Cuban, who recently shared his happiness over his $275 million tax bill with anyone willing to listen and suffering from nothing more meaningful to report on. Here are just a couple of his insightful, prescient comments. Quote, "We only get to be entrepreneurs and enjoy the freedoms we have because of the men and women who dedicate their lives to protecting our country. They deserve every penny they get, and my taxes go to support them," end quote. Yes, they certainly do. He added, quote, "Some people may find it distasteful to pay taxes. I don't. I find it patriotic," end quote. As an important disclosure and what may come as a shock, to my knowledge, Mr. Cuban is not a subscriber to this channel. There are so many things that I could and definitely want to say here, but we'll let our author's arguments stand on their own and show how profoundly ignorant the narc really is. Essential to understanding how powerful the perceptions of those being ruled are, we're presented with having to differentiate, quote, between a command being justified based upon the situation and being justified based upon who gave the command. And here we are, back at that core issue from our last discussion, which is the seeming mother of all human traits, and I would also say weaknesses, and that is our incessant preference to abdicate personal responsibility. In this case, our responsibility to exercise care, logic, and reason, and engage our conscience as our guide to what is right and moral versus what is wrong and immoral. While it's tragic that we do this, it's also pretty understandable. Isn't this what we're all taught? Do as the authority figure says. The parent, the teacher, the government expert, the various flavors of law enforcement, the doctor, the financial advisor, countless sources of instruction that since birth we're told to follow. And then fast forward into adulthood and we're put on autopilot with the nonstop lure of entertainment, consumerism, politics, and so many other forms of distraction, constantly reinforcing that happiness and pleasure are the pinnacle of human existence. But back to the issue of command being justified by circumstances or a situation versus the party issuing the command, we're given a scenario. No one would assert that they had special rights if they were to stop a mugger, let's say, from perpetrating a crime. They would simply be saying that the situation justified their action. On the other hand, the basis of government is certain people possessing special rights to rule, and thus there is a group, the governed, who have an obligation to obey. We're also faced with another potential issue, at least for the moral relativists among us. Rose cautions us not to fall into the trap of attempting to make a judgment about whether any authority, government in this case, is, to use his terms, good or bad. As I see it, this is engaging in politics. If they just did this a little differently or spent more money on those programs. No, we must, as he suggests, determine whether the underlying concept of authority is rational. And we'll close on this most important of questions to help us make that evaluation. Can a person assign to someone else or some other group rights which they themselves do not possess? To use a classic example, how would my actions be viewed if I went to my neighbors and announced that I would begin collecting amounts from them to educate my children, and that if they refused to pay, I had engaged armed individuals who would imprison them? Furthermore, if they resisted my thugs, they could be shot. I can assure you that that would be a very dangerous proposition in my neck of the woods, but does that process sound vaguely familiar? No doubt it most certainly has been done, but through a process that involves coercion, violence, injustice, and deception. Final question. For those few who have actually given it any thought, do we really believe this is moral? Or have we performed some type of psychological jujitsu and convinced ourselves it is because we feel so helpless to stop it? Well, that's it for today. Thanks for being here, and come back as we delve further into Larkin Rose's The Most Dangerous Superstition. Be well, and see you then.